Chapter 40. From Dust to Dust. Mid-1930s. Old Timmer. Term for an elderly person. The old-timer had seen many changes during their lifetime. Jenny Renfro Harness celebrated her 100th birthday in 1934, and her son Billy turned 71 that year. The widespread heat started early and lasted most of the summer of 1934. From June through August in Fort Smith, Arkansas, there were 53 days with a temperature of 100 or more. When a heat wave goes more than 2 weeks, it is devastating to crops, especially when the plants have not matured. The worst part of the heat and drought in that time was in 1934 through 1936. Intense heat causes heat-related sickness and death. The estimate of those that died from heat in 1936 was 5,000. A lot of deaths were unreported or not classified as cause of death. Heat stresses the body and takes more of your energy. It's not only the heat, but how long the heat lasts that takes its toll on the body. The air quality also was an issue as the dust was choking and there was grit in their eyes and food. Many migrants left the Midwest for other parts of the country to escape the devastation. For some time, Katie Elizabeth Flat Harness had been mentally in decline, suffering from dementia. She left this world in the summer heat of July 26, 1934. The second wife of Billy Harness was buried in the Bear Creek Cemetery next to her daughter Martha at the age of 70. Her quality of life, and perhaps feeling that she was a burden on a family with limited time and resources, must have made Katie yearn for home. St. Paul wrote about the blessing of our passing into heaven in 2 Corinthians 5. For we know that if the earthly tent we live in is destroyed, we have a building from God, an eternal house in heaven, not built by human hands. Therefore, we are always confident and know that as long as we are at home in the body, we are away from the Lord. The dry years were in full swing in 1934 and continued for 5 more years in many parts of the country. Earl Harness said that both Giles and Riley were able to raise some corn every year, although it was much less than normal. He said that they were able to produce because they got their corn out early to take advantage of moisture and temperature. Also, they cultivated their corn by heaping dirt up around it to help hold in the moisture and prohibit competing weeds. Cultivating the corn involved using a mule and a plow. Different types of plows were made for various tasks. Usually, when the corn was up knee-high, the last plowing was done to lay the corn by. This procedure was tilling the middles and getting the dirt heaped up around the stalks to help brace the corn in the wind and to hold in moisture. Once the corn was laid by, it would not be worked again until it was time to harvest the ears of corn. The plowman's use of the term was for any crop that was plowed for the last time. It was then up to the good Lord to grow them a crop with sun and rain. In the Bible, it is called the increase. During the dirty years, as some called them, those that had a radio heard Bing Crosby's song that was released in late 1932, "Brother, Can You Spare a Dime?" It became the best-selling record of its period and was viewed as an anthem of the shattered dreams of the era. By radio, FDR delivered his fireside chats, giving his plans and offering hope to Americans. He appealed to God and Providence at the end of almost every speech, asking the radio audience to be patient, understanding, and to have faith. With songs, comedy, and news going out on the airways, the grasshoppers also took to the air. In a biblical proportional plague, grasshoppers and sometimes chinch bugs overwhelmed large sections of the Midwest, destroying crops. The dry conditions caused their hatch to be great, and like their cousin the locust, they moved on the ground, devouring and maturing with wings, then taking to the air, sometimes in such numbers that their wings caused a great sound. Their great numbers darkened the sun, flying in droves like clouds. It was so scary to see and hear them. When the young hoppers emerged, they ate everything. The first wave would eat all the green, and then the second wave would eat fence posts, clothing, hair on cattle, and anything they could fill their hungry stomachs with. Sometimes they covered the ground in such thick hordes that a senior entomologist in Colorado, named Dr. J.R. Parker, threw down his hat onto the ground in Colorado Springs and trapped 247 grasshoppers underneath it. My wife's grandmother, Maury Crowder Otis, grew up in western Oklahoma in the town of Gaja, and she told me about the grasshoppers. She said they had a garden planted, and it was up and growing when word came that the hoppers were coming their way. Her folks made a barricade on the side of the garden that the bugs were coming from, using anything they could find to cause the grasshoppers to walk around the garden, as they generally take the path of least resistance. The attempt worked at first, but when they found their way into the garden, they ate everything. Nothing green remained, and the hoppers moved on looking for more to devour. If dust, heat, and hoppers were not enough to plague the people, there were also the great outlaws of the Depression era. It's amazing how many famous public enemies there were. Barrow and Parker, Bonnie and Clyde, John Dillinger, Charles Floyd, Pretty Boy Floyd, George Machine Gun Kelly, and George Babyface Nelson, to name a few. Oklahoma was a hot spot to hit and run. Sometimes outlaws ran for the hills of Arkansas to hide and then rob. A decade earlier, in 1921, Henry Starr, along with 3 pals, attempted to rob the People's Bank in my hometown of Harrison, Arkansas. The bank's president, W.J. Myers, heard a rumor that outlaws were in the area, so he had a loaded rifle in the bank vault. When Starr entered and started his holdup, Myers came out with his rifle and shot Starr. His 3 friends fled in what was called a Tin Lizzie, an old Model T Ford. Starr was mortally wounded and later died in the Boone County Jail located directly behind the bank. Reflection. Many people in the Depression era were wondering what God was doing to them and the nation. The drought, the dust, plagues of grasshoppers, darkness, it all seemed to be similar to judgments brought upon Egypt in the days of Moses. Men lined up for food like the Egyptians seeking help from Joseph. Was God again sending a message to the people? When I shut up heaven and there is no rain, or command the locusts to devour the land, or send pestilence among my people, if my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven and will forgive their sin and heal their land. The 2 Chronicles 7:13-14.